first joined a year ago, we were in the news and, we had a cyber incident that impacted us. Obviously, one of the biggest learnings from that incident is, everyone typically focuses on technology, right? And I always break it into people, process, and technology. And unless you get all three legs of the stool in order, you're never safe.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Sesh Tirumala. Sesh is the Chief Information Officer of Western Digital, a leader in digital storage solutions that earns in excess of $12 billion in annual revenue. He's been in role for roughly a year, and in that time has led a transformation of IT and the company. He's focused on cybersecurity and risk management, as well as culture, employee experience, and engineering excellence, among other topics of focus. I look forward to speaking with him about each and more. He's a past Chief Information Officer of PagerDuty and of Anaplan, and a past CIO of a $10 billion everything as a service offering at Cisco as well. Sesh, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thank you, Peter. Super excited to be here.
It's a great pleasure. Well, maybe we begin, Sesh, with an overview of Western Digital's business. Talk a bit about the business you're in, please.
Western Digital is in the business of data storage solutions. It's all about high capacity data storage and high performance data storage. So essentially, we have a hard disk drive business and a solid state drive business. And we're pretty much in laptops, desktops, data centers. A lot of our large customers are cloud providers, whether it's Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I think the company's been in existence for decades. And now with the buzz of generative AI, obviously we saw the first wave of a lot of the GPU growth. And I think from a data storage perspective, we see that as a second follow. So again, super excited in terms of the industry and where we are currently.
Excellent. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about your role as Chief Information Officer. What's within your purview as CIO, please, Sesh?
From my day-to-day responsibilities perspective, I have what is classic IT. I'm also responsible for the security organization, so the CISO reports into me. And then I'm also responsible for a lot of the data and analytics. And lastly, given that we are a global manufacturing company, a lot of the factory IT systems that manage our $12-14 billion business, I'm also responsible for those. So essentially, it's classic IT, data and analytics, security, and the factory systems.
Very interesting. Well, I know from early on in your role, in the first days of your time with the organization, it experienced, as so many companies have experienced, a cyber incident. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that trial by fire in those early days and how it created a kind of focus you probably weren't expecting in those early days. Can you talk about that story, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So again, when I first joined a year ago, a little more than a year ago, so we were in the news and, we had a cyber incident that impacted us. And the team really did a phenomenal job in rallying behind and really ensuring that, we remediated the incident and we got all our systems back up and running. Obviously, one of the biggest learnings from that incident is, everyone typically focuses on technology, right? And I always break it into people, process, and technology. And unless you get all three legs of the stool in order, you're never safe, right? Or you're never built enough guardrails in your ecosystem. And then obviously we're a very complex manufacturing supply chain organization. So we work with external, partners, logistic partners, customers. So the perimeter there is no perimeter technically, right? So again, for us, I think via that incident, what we learned is how do we tighten up our change process systems? How do we also look at our help desk systems? Because when somebody calls in for a password reset, how do you really validate who the actors are, right? And do you train? And many a time, you outsource your help desk function, right? And how do you ensure that even within your four walls and partners that you engage with are trained with best-in-class mechanisms of validation, just like in your personal life. Even though you have an MFA and you got all validation, there's always a loophole. So again, I think, the team did a phenomenal job in terms of, again, taking those lessons learned in terms of our help desk processes, our technology. How do we also communicate, with external customers and really remediate, right? So again, I think from that, we were fortunate that, there was no impact from a revenue perspective or from our ability to ship product and continue our R&D, but it really shed light in terms of our people, process, technology. And since then, as a part of my own IT strategy, my number one priority is risk compliance and cybersecurity.
That makes sense. I'd love to get further into your strategy as well. But before we do so, you rightly call out people as a critical component here in order to get all of that you've described right and more for that matter. And I know that you have put a lot of thought into culture, the sort of culture you hope blossoms within the organization. I mean, drawing, of course, on the culture that preceded your time with the company. But can you talk a bit about the role of culture and maybe some of the ways in which you would define it in an environment like Western Digital?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's a cliche, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So again, I think what I find, and there's, different companies have got different cultures. And from what I observed, and this is also in general what I've seen talking to a lot of my peers. So one of the biggest things is, how do you avoid stovepipes, right? Because in IT, culturally, you're supporting a function. So let's say, you're responsible for supporting sales. So you have a sales IT organization, right? Or an order processing or a financials IT. So obviously you got the functions in how you support the different stakeholders, but more importantly, you need to think of the connected tissue, right? One of the reasons I love being in IT is because you get to see the 360 view of the business. And again, one of the things is the CIO more a business leader or a technology leader, right? And I would say a combination of both, but it's got to be business first. You got to be understanding, the role of the business. Where do we see growth opportunities? Where do we see cost savings opportunities? How do you streamline and simplify your processes? How do you really delight your customers, your partners, your employees? So again, I think that's the exciting part of being in IT. So for me, culturally, what I felt within the organization is everyone was working very hard within their individual functions and towers and measuring themselves. But then when you flip it and come from an outside in perspective, right? Don't talk to me about Microsoft Teams and Slack and ABC, but what's the employee's experience in a meeting, in the way they collaborate, and how do you measure that, right? So to me, the biggest thing on culture was around flipping on its head. Don't be tech centric. Look at it from a process and outside in perspective, and then bust the silos. And then the second thing is in a team sport, right? This is my analogy. There's what's on the front of the jersey and what's on the back of the jersey, right? And never forget that respect the position that you play. But when you represent a stakeholder, you represent all of IT. You can't say, hey, that's the network team's issue or that's the infrastructure team's issue. You got to take accountability and represent IT as a whole, and then be hard internally to hold your peers accountable for improving service levels or operational levels agreements in order to deliver a world-class experience, right? So again, I think the biggest one is silo busting, right? And then the second thing is always respect the position you play, but you're playing for what's on the front of the jersey, right?
I love that analogy. I appreciate you sharing that. So the sports team and jersey analogy, I think, is particularly apt in developing that mentality. You alluded briefly there to the importance of employee experience and the role that your team plays there as well. Can you talk a bit about some of your thought process on methods of improving it, and especially from a digital perspective, the means by which you can impact that best?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is still a work in progress, right? And so we closely work with both corporate communications and with our people solutions teams, right? In terms of, because again, is there a single team within a company that is responsible for employee experience, right? And the answer is typically no. So therefore, I think IT has an opportunity to play 51% of the decision making, right? So like I said, again, the classic and the traditional thinking is I have a team that's responsible for email, communication, collaboration. Then you work with facilities for your conference rooms in terms of video conferencing, audio conferencing, whiteboarding, things of that nature. Then you have what's your, obviously post-COVID, we still try to get people as many times in the week to come into the office, but still give or take, it's about 2 to 3 days a week, right? So again, what's that in the office collaboration experience? So that's one set of capabilities. Then the second is, when I was getting interviewed for the job, what's my interviewing process, right? How seamless is the calendar set up, the meeting invite set up? Is it a one click to join the meeting? Because you're already, having butterflies in your stomach just before an interview, and you just want to make sure that the tech just works, right? So once you finish your interview, if let's say you get an offer, what's your onboarding experience like? And then, once you onboard, how do you drive engagement? So right from, I find you to I recruit you to I onboard you to I make you productive and I drive more and more of your engagement. And then hopefully I don't have to ever leave. But in the event one does, this day and age, people do, right, for different reasons. Then what's your offboarding experience, right? So to me, the employee experience is really about that end to end from, finding talent to growing them and nurturing them, I think is super important. And then the second thing is, how do you also create personas? For example, and we did this, in my past company and here, day one, if a software engineer joins a company, can you make he or she fully productive on day one, which basically means that you've provisioned the systems, the tools, right from writing code. You should be able to write code and deploy it on day one, right? So how do you have that mindset that it's not just about getting your PC or Mac with everything set up, but knowing that this is a software engineer and I'm going to provision a GitHub or a Jenkins or things of that nature ahead of time, so you're productive on day one. And likewise for a sales AE, access to Salesforce and access to a lot of the critical sales tools. It's all set up, right? So then that way, now all you're trying to do is get on with your onboarding experience and learning and being productive on the job, right? So that's how I look at it in terms of employee experience. Less about the tech, more about a day in the life of, and can you really make it efficient and frictionless?
Sesh, in light of what you described, I wonder what skill sets are rising in importance within your organization that you would offer some perspectives on.
Hey, Peter, one of the critical factors is also about taking stock about the skill set within your organization, right? And I think it's super important to map out what are the current skills that you have, an inventory of all the key skills and competencies within the IT organization, and then look at where the puck's going in the industry, right? What are the futuristic skills that you need? And you need to do a fit gap analysis in terms of what you have and what skills are in demand and what you need. And then you need to really think about how do you bring in talent from early in career, because you also want to create a growth from your career perspective early in career from university hires, university interns, etc. And then the second thing is, where do you need seasoned hires, people that bring in that skill set and know-how, because you need to infuse technology or that business knowledge and capability within the organization. So I would strongly encourage all CIOs do a regular skill set inventory analysis between basic, proficient, and advanced throughout the entire organization, including leadership, and really be prepared in terms of the future requirements and needs. And that's a super important success criteria within the organization.
Well said. I like the whole notion of this end-to-end thought process, as you note. Well, earlier you talked about the imperative strategically of security, risk, and compliance. Understandably, again, given the incident in the early days of your tenure as well. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about changes in philosophy or process associated with that. And obviously, innovation is about risk taking. The idea of risk doesn't mean being riskless, but obviously also understanding that you are taking into consideration risk tolerances and the security and compliance implications to all that you and your team do. Can you talk a bit about your philosophy around security, risk, and compliance, please?
Yeah, and it's always a balance between perform and transform, right? You got to make sure that you never compromised the existing infrastructure, but at the same time, you can't swing on the other end where every change becomes a bureaucratic change that you just can't innovate, because now these days, if you don't innovate, you're left behind, right? So I think it goes back to how do you create an IT engagement model and the culture of leaning in, right? And really, it's a team sport. And rather than treat the CISO in terms of, typically people think of, well, as soon as you say a security organization, well, it takes for too long, or, there's not enough resources, etc. So to me, I think it's really having a clarity on, as we engage with the business to the best we can, get a sense for the key priorities, the roadmaps, the investments. I think it's super important so that you can apply your scarce resources against the highest order bit, right? The second thing is also being very close to your procurement organization, right? Because a lot of the software purchases happen through, and many a time even IT is not aware, right? and it goes straight to the procurement team. So again, having a close interlock with your procurement team and teaching them and training them so that they push back and are able to rope in and bring the CIO and the CISO into the conversation when certain flags and conditions come up, right, during the review process. So to me, I think those are two critical things. And then continuing to teach the organization, because again, let's take Sarbanes-Oxley as an example, right? Because again, risk and compliance, SOX is a big compliance aspect. It's not a one-time done and dusted effort. It's got to be a part of your day-to-day performance and SLAs and management with all changes, sitting with the finance organization, sitting with the tax organization, making sure that all the controls are well tested. More importantly, is it well documented? The second thing is, do you have the right practices to ensure auditability and compliance? And then when you do with an external auditor, in our case, KPMG, are you able to demonstrate both as a business and IT organization the strict adherence to all the SOX controls, right? So again, it's funny because when you have a large team in India and Asia, etc., and many a time, early in career, people also learn through production support and SOX compliance and testing. And I was in an all hands once, and I was talking to people who are early in their career, and I asked this individual, "What do you do?" And, "Oh, well, I'm just doing testing of these controls and validation." And then I mentioned in my own hand saying that if we fail the SOX significant deficiencies and demonstrate that we have material weaknesses, guess what? It means that a lot of the C-suite goes to the jail, including the CIO, right? So failing a SOX audit means jail, right? And that light bulb is, oh my God, this is why it's important to have fiduciary controls. This is what it means to be a publicly traded company. This is why it's important, because I think it's important for people at the lower levels to understand. Otherwise, what happens is when you're just testing a control, it may sound a little mundane, but how do you translate it to the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis is so critical that it can put your company at risk from a SEC reporting, financial fiduciary requirements perspective, et cetera. And for a publicly traded companies, these are something that you never compromise, right? So making that as a part of your culture and your DNA, I think is super important. And then likewise with cyber too, our past learnings has been that, we tend to go to the board meetings and you have these NIST frameworks and you have these, maturity colors that you basically say where you have green and I always call it the watermelon effect, right? It's green on the outside, and as soon as you slice it, it's red on the inside. So again, how do you ensure that you really are being practical about the NIST framework and you're able to call out the risks? And again, you don't know what you don't know, but to the best you can, you need to quantify the risk. And again, it's about people, process, technology, right? And it's also about, even simple things like these days, all the phishing emails that you get, and how do you train the organization when to click and not click, right? So I think all those are super important. Just doing a one-time tabletop exercise is not enough. It's got to be a regular, sport that you do frequently. So again, I think those are some of the key learnings. And then the last thing is when you have an incident and when the going gets rough, you'll truly get to know who's a partner and who's a vendor, right? And we clearly learned, who was truly willing to go above and beyond and demonstrate partnership versus some that were just vendors. And then you need to know what you have to do to really, figure out what's your next step from that experience.
Very well said. I appreciate those reflections and also the reiteration of the point of the people, the process, and the technology working in concert in order to get these frameworks correct. I know in other areas of strategic importance to you that you are driving transformation through is operational and engineering excellence. Can you talk a bit about how that applies, some of the methods that you're using? Again, early days, I recognize,
Yep.
but how that's being enacted within Western Digital as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody wants to nowadays work on cool capabilities, and I call it perform and transform, right? Perform is basically, it's like, water, gas, electricity, right? You expect it to be always on. And when things are not always on, it creates big issues, right? You go, well, what the hell? I don't get water, I don't get gas, electricity. So same thing from an IT perspective. To me, operational excellence basically means that all our services are up and running, right? Email is up, collaboration is up, all the mission critical ones, the ability to message, meet, collaborate, place orders, your website is up, you can book revenue, you can ship product. So again, I call these as always on services. And they better have, three nines or four nines in terms of, availability. Again, it's a cost versus, investment balance. But to me, operational excellence is, always on services, no compromises, etc. Now, obviously, in the software world, stuff happens, and I think, it's important that when things happen, it's the attitude with which we respond, and not a finger pointing game on a bridge, right? So again, what is the mean time to restoration when an incident happens? And then this was classic with my previous company, PagerDuty, right? And the whole premise was around, how do we minimize downtime? So likewise, we implemented PagerDuty when I first came on board. So again, I think the thinking of operational excellence is measure your always on services, and anytime there's an issue or an outage, let's learn from it. And again, people, process, technology. And most of the times you have to measure yourself in how good you are with changes. And many incidents actually happen due to changes. So how do you minimize change related incidents, right? Which is you're making new features or a code change or etc. So how do you really minimize that? And when things happen or go south, have a robust rollback plan or a fallback plan, communicate early, right? And escalate early. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. I think it's super important. We recently had an issue with one of our big software providers, and the team did not even know who to call on the partner side, right? So again, knowing who to call, how to escalate, even with your big software providers and partners, I think is super important. So all that I call as operational excellence, and you measure in terms of uptime, outages, change-related incidents, mean time to resolution, et cetera. And then on the engineering excellence, it's about having the right process, tooling to deploy software. And we still have some work to do to fully embrace Agile, right? And Agile is not about producing crap faster, but you have to have the right due diligence across the board. But it's once your requirements and what your outcomes are well understood, then how do you accelerate with the business, right? And bring the business along on this journey. So engineering excellence is all about, do I have source code automation? Can I do unit testing and dev testing and integration testing at scale? And I automate a lot of things, both from a cyber and security perspective and from a code-based perspective. Can all my ML and data engineering and pipeline engineering, are they all digitized and automated? Are we really leveraging the cloud-first mindset, right, rather than build everything in your data center or in a colo? So I think a lot of these principles go into and think about security first rather than an afterthought, even during your code review process, et cetera. So those are the two pillars in terms of operationally excellent and engineering excellence, and bring in the software defined paradigm, even from an infrastructure perspective, right? Especially with, there's a lot of logging and monitoring, but what is truly observability? And again, in the industry too, the word observability is super important, where it's, classic IT, it's a network issue or a data center issue or a data issue, but really, how do you, because the users don't care where the issue is, right? I can't book an order, or I can't engage with you on your website. So the end users should never care about what's broken, but it's our job in IT to ensure that we are accountable for that end-to-end experience, right? So I know I said a lot, but that's how I would categorize the two.
Very interesting. Again, appreciate the overview there. I mentioned in the introduction that you've been a chief information officer multiple times and an IT executive across a diverse array of technology-centric organizations. You've been at major scaled companies, your current post, of course, at Western Digital, also Cisco, I mentioned before. You've also been at scaling technology organizations like PagerDuty and Anaplan, in both cases as chief information officer also. I wonder, what do you draw from your experiences back and forth? What advantages do you have in having experienced scaled organizations and helping them sort of foster continued growth and transformation, while also being in the kind of even faster paced growth organizations like a PagerDuty or Anaplan? What are you drawing from each of those experiences into one like you have today that might be enlightening?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent a long career at Cisco and led a lot of transformation, great journeys across, the business. And obviously, having seen the company grow from when I joined them, they were like 4 billion. And when I left, we were about 51 billion in Cisco. So again, just going through the sales go-to-market growth, the e-commerce growth, the shift towards new business models like, software as a subscription, also for on-premise networking gear, data center gear as a subscription. So again, thinking through that whole business model shift, building systems for scale, and with high operational excellence metrics that I mentioned was a huge learning from a Cisco perspective. And then obviously, as a part of your next career growth and movement, I joined Anaplan and PagerDuty. And one of the biggest things is when you join companies that are much smaller and you have a smaller footprint even within an IT organization, one of the biggest things is in a large company, you take things for granted, right? Because your budgets are fairly large, you have larger teams at your disposal and things of that nature. And when you soon realize that when you're in a smaller company, everyone's got to own up, like, top line and bottom line, right? And in the SaaS companies, the rule of 40 was super important between your profitability on top line versus your expense and OPEX. And how do you really thrive to be towards the rule of 40? And many companies were still not profitable, despite good growth, right? Which then means that it's all about the bottom line, right? And driving more efficiency and more automation. So doing more with less, right? So I think the biggest learning there was, with every hiring, where do you digitize, right? Where do you automate and really look for a partnership with the CFO on what are the levers towards accomplishing the rule of 40 and really trying to do within IT, what can we do, right? That was a big, learning and takeaway and really being a lean and mean organization. And then the second thing was just around many a time you're selling to, fellow practitioners, CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, etc. So how do you also help influence the product, right? In terms of the storyboard, the pitch deck, what features and functionalities are important? How do you unlock relationships and really provide the practitioner's view back into the product, right? And again, what drew me back to a larger was partially a personal reason, but at the same time, I wanted to get back into a global manufacturing footprint from a more personal career perspective. So again, which made me come back to a larger organization. And again, the complexities of a large organization, having been in small teams where you have to really be conscious about your investments, helps me bring that same value for money. Because I think at the end of the day, we got to treat all of this as your own personal money and really think about that value for money conversation. How do you measure ROI, right? How do you ensure that the costs and expenses are in line? And one of the biggest things, and we always get dinged in IT, is takes too long, costs too much, right? That's just the tagline, no matter where you are. And how do you continue to have a storyboard with the right metrics to show exactly what your costs are, right? So what's your annual budget? Let me break it down between what's fixed, right? What's non-fixed, and having that narrative with your CFO and the C-suite, I think is super important. And like I said, one of the beautiful things of being in IT is, again, you have no dog in the fight, right? And I find many a time being in the middle of breaking log jams between a CFO or a CRO or a COO, because you just lay out the facts and you go, well, here's what's being asked of me, and here's the scarce resources, and the business case, we've implemented it, but we don't see us accomplishing the business case. So do we continue to feed the beast or do we cut bait, right? So again, I think one of the things is, I call it courageous decision making and the ability to influence and bring via a steering committee the right leaders at the table to have the uncomfortable conversations, I think is an expectation of a CIO, right? And I think that's been a good growing opportunity early on. I've had my own scars where you say some things and you don't realize the political landscape, but you got to be politically savvy and you got to tee it up and grease the skids a little bit before you're able to talk about what the outcomes are. So that's how I would categorize that, Peter.
That's a really nice reflections. I appreciate you offering those, Sesh. As you look to the future, especially as somebody who's so immersed in technology and has been across these different settings we just referred to, I wonder what trends excite you as you look to the future. What are some of the topics that you're investigating further, or perhaps are beginning to make their way onto the roadmap?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm trying to bucketize things, to be honest with you, between perform and transform, right? I still have a few things or many things to accomplish on the perform bucket, which is all about, cloud first, asset light, beef up our risk compliance posture, employee experience is a pet peeve, right? So again, how do we continue to digitize and look for value for money? Are we getting the value for money from all of our major platforms that we're invested in, right? Because all these are multi-year subscription deals. Are we really getting the value for money? Are we engaging with the partners on a regular basis, pushing for features and functionality? So I think a big chunk of it is in the perform category of employee experience, customer experience, improvements in your risk compliance and cyber posture, and really being asset light. And then on the transform side, potentially a business model shift in terms of as a service, that is one. The second thing is, again, data and analytics, right? I still think that a lot of our metrics and capabilities are rare view looking. And again, it's not unique to us in Western Digital, but again, it's about an industry too. It's don't admire what happened in the last quarter. And still, if you look at many companies, culturally, you're running QBRs, you're sitting in Q4 and you're running a Q3 QBR, right? Which it's a rare view looking to begin with. That's a rare view lens, right? And we tend to drain slides and talk about 45 minutes in a 1 hour meeting about what happened last quarter, rather than, hey, here's what I'm going to predict is going to happen this quarter and next quarter, and here are the adjustments I need to make, and here's forward looking, right? So I still think on the analytics front, we need to be forward looking, and for that, I mean, honestly, we talk about a lot about Gen AI and the buzz, right? I think it all goes back to having a robust data model. And how do you take opportunity data from Salesforce, bookings data from an ERP, to an install-based data in your install-based system, your entitlement data, and really connecting it from the lens of a customer, right? Who have you sold it to? Sold to, sold through, because in an ecosystem, you're not many a times selling directly to end customers. You're selling through a channel. So I think it's super important to understand your routes to market, your go-to-market motions, and really know who your customer truly is, and really focus on the right data quality and data completeness problems, right? So in a way, it's back to basics is how I say it, Peter. And once your data model is robust and strong, and you have the right technology, whether it's a lakehouse or a data warehouse in the cloud, I think all those are given table stakes, and you got enough ample technology choices to pick and choose from. Then comes, hey, in the future, gone are the days where somebody's going to log in into a Tableau or a Power BI and run a report, right? You're going to have a prompt, and you're going to say, who are my top 3 customers? Or which product of mine is generating more than $10 million in revenue? Or who's my top sales rep, as an example? And all these are going to be prompt-based questions, right? And those are things to find information. The second thing could be is actions, right? It's like, hey, I want to take a Monday off in July, and let me know what's the best time to take it. And you get a prompt back, and the system creates a record in Workday, as an example, right? And you get your time off request approved. So then that becomes an action based. So long story short, to me, I think it's about prepping the data models and then embracing the right LLMs and the right technology architectures to enable in truly how do we do generative AI based on the different departmental use cases. What's relevant for sales? What's relevant for engineering? What's relevant for employees? What's relevant for manufacturing? I think that's super important. And then the other area that's super important for us is IT and OT, right? IT being information technology, OT operational technology. So again, we have a lot of factories, and these are world-class factories in Far East. So again, in these factories, how do you have the concept of a digital twin, right? How do we use imaging, text, videos to predict quality problems or reliability problems, right? And really figure out from your production line and your manufacturing line, how do you demonstrate the best operational technology where the yields are super high, failure rate is super low, and that our production lines are full capacity with very minimal defects on the production line. So again, we call it the factories of the future, fully digitized, fully automated MES systems. Those are super important. And then in OT, again, we're also looking at technologies from a security and facilities perspective. If there's a fire, do we have enough sensors to detect there's an issue? Because you can't physically have people deployed everywhere. So how do you respond in terms of a crisis, right? In terms of OT technology and large campuses and large factories and things of that nature. So again, that's just a few things that we are considering across the realm. Some of it is back to basics, and some of it is more futuristic and forward looking.
Again, great reflections all, Sesh. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you before I let you go, is there anything recently you've been reading, listening to, or watching that you would particularly recommend to our audience?
I mean, the one thing is, there's this book called Working Backwards, right? I think it's written by, some key people from Amazon. And one of the things in IT is always about how do you tell the story with the end in mind, and then you work your plan backwards, right? And many a time in IT, when we communicate, we're talking about widgets and technology and tools and less about the story and the narrative and imagine. And if you want to think about a product mindset, you need to think around the finished product and then work your milestones and plans backwards. And then the second thing is, even in your PowerPoints and the ability to create the storyboard and narrative, what's the punchline? And how do you use as few slides as possible to really talk about with the bias towards action? So to me, I think that's a good read in general to talk about a finished product in mind and launch, work your way backwards and iron out all the kinks. In a way, you're writing your press release like, if something's going to go out, let's say you have a big ERP release in a year from now, how do you write the press release as though you're in 12 months from now and answer all the key questions and then work your plan backwards?
A great recommendation. Thank you for that, and a great rationale as to why it has been an important read for you. Thank you for sharing that, Sesh.
And I still read your book that's in the back there, The World Class IT Strategy, Peter. That's a very good book. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that as well, Sesh. And I want to thank you more generally speaking for a great conversation. It's fascinating to hear more about your tenure now, a year and change in at Western Digital, the various transformations that you are leading across the organization. Also, great to hear more about your tenure as a chief information officer across multiple organizations and how you've drawn from that experience, culminating in your current post. It's been a really terrific conversation. Thank you again.
Likewise, Peter. Thank you for the opportunity.